In a surprising turn of events, Tokyo Game Show brought us a demo for Metaphor Refantazio. So with my anticipation at an all-time high, and also in the middle of my Final Fantasy XVI playthrough, I played through the demo of Metaphor Refantazio.
That's just how it is.
Metaphor is Atlus's latest, brand new IP. Fresh off Persona 5, Hashino's latest game takes place in a fantasy world where people view our world as a utopia. Which, I guess from an outsider looking in, maybe? In some ways, this is about perspective and how our world is delivered to these people through a fairy tale novel. Regardless, Metaphor's early hours are spent with you learning about their world. Your character, which you may choose to name him whatever you want, is more than just a slate for you to experience the world by. He is his own character. While you may pick for him to sound confident, he seems like he's anxious and unsure about the path he should take. The game pushes you into the world pretty quick, and despite some dialogue-heavy sections, which you should expect from any JRPG, you get into everything without much stalling. And to be fair, a lot of dialogue is needed to establish the situation, the world, and much more. I felt a little lost early on since I was kind of tossed into the middle of an already ongoing plot thread, but it irons out the confusion relatively fast. All this said, I don't want to make too many judgments about the story side of things. This is early into a 60 to 80 hour JRPG. While there are definitely things you can glean from this, like basic themes and understandings, I'm going to wait and see before I put my foot down about any opinions on the story.
Right. What am I doing again?
If you're surprised to hear me say that I think the gameplay is solid, you shouldn't be. Metaphor is unique in its own ways, but it also is a lot like a combination of SMT and Persona's existing systems. The turn-based combat returns with a flashy and kind of chaotic UI design. For all intents and purposes, the UI is good. It can be a bit overwhelming at times, because unlike P5 where the elements took up just a reasonable part of the screen, Metaphor's UI is very flashy and showy. It's big, and it's in your face a lot, which means even the menus are huge. But that's not going to stop me from enjoying this. The game has some real-time combat elements, but the core of the game is turn-based. If you manage to deplete a foe's gauge before jumping into the turn-based battles, you get a free preemptive strike and a stun. The combat itself is more reminiscent of Shin Megami Tensei, using a form of the press turn system. Hit a weakness and you gain an extra turn, miss or hit an immunity and you lose 2. It's a very fun system, and if you've played Atlus titles in the past, you'll definitely feel right at home here. Metaphor also introduces a retry button. You can rewind back to the beginning of a fight if things don't go your way. You can't rewind a set number of turns though. This retry button is exclusively to start over from turn 1. And I really like this feature because it cuts down on the time you may waste having to die because something went wrong in a tough fight and then coming back. That said, even with this, I still did actually wipe on hard several times. That's not a notion to the game's difficulty, it's more just me having issues getting used to a new game. Combat is a lot of fun, but customization is where this and most Atlus titles tend to shine. However, unlike Persona and SMT where you're customizing and fusing demons to get better party members, in Metaphor there is something of a job system. I mean, it literally is a job system. Every job has its own weakness and resistances, as well as its own skill sets and even overworld combat animations. The protagonist's first job is the Seeker, which is meant to be a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type of job. Definitely not the strongest, but it's especially useful in the early game. As you progress, you unlock jobs by forging bonds with other characters, which we'll come back to that a little bit later. Having a variety of jobs is definitely more key to combat. There are even unique interactions from enemies depending on the jobs you have in your party. For example, goblins don't like mages, so if they so much as see a staff in your party, they'll slam you with a multi-hit AoE attack. I'll have to keep my eye on this in the future and see how often this kind of thing comes into play. There's also skill inheritance to some extent in this. For example, Seeker starts with a healing skill, while Healer, weirdly enough, does not. So you'll probably want to inherit the weak heal onto the healer before ditching your Seeker off the bat. Additionally, you have access to dual attacks, which change based on your jobs. These consume 2 turns, but offer stronger effects than single attacks, but finding the value to using them over acting individually is also the key. Customization will likely be core to this game being easier or harder. On the other hand, there is the overworld combat, which is simple. You're not doing crazy combos or anything, just simple strikes to deplete their guard gauge, and then jumping into the actual turn-based combat. As I said, your job will change how you fight in the overworld, so it's best to try out your attacks first before immediately jumping into the dungeons. For the most part, I'm pretty satisfied with the combat system so far. It's very familiar, yet still has elements that set it apart from the other games. There's going to be a lot of stuff to test with the customization and dual attacks, and I'm fully looking forward to doing so in the full release. Even if it's just the combat, I'll definitely enjoy this, if nothing else.
Nope, I'm asleep. Good night.
Haha, very funny.
So combat is very Atlus, but you can't complete that without social sim aspects. Wowee, it's just like Persona 5. Wow, I can't believe I can talk to characters just like in Persona 5. Golly gosh, I'm so glad there are moments you can interact with the characters, just like Persona 5. Is it obvious that not every time characters have bonding moments and little episodes that the game is like Persona 5? Can we move on from that? Anyways, yeah, this game has what is essentially the social links and social stats from the Persona series. So, despite my complaining, it is kind of like Persona. At least in this case. You'll be spending days watching crowds or listening to tales to increase your social stats to open up more options. Bonding with characters in this game actually opens up more jobs. The team is really taking the whole looping feedback that P5 had going with it, where social stuff affects dungeon stuff and dungeon stuff can affect social stuff. It makes forming new bonds really gratifying. That said, I didn't really get to do any additional bonding aside from the scripted ones so far, so we'll have to see where that goes. But all in all, this section of the game is kind of borrowing a lot of DNA from the Persona series, which is not surprising considering the fact that Hashino was working on the Persona series for 10 years. But maybe surprising, because about 30 seconds ago I was complaining about the Persona series and all the comparisons to it.
How about we explore the area ahead of us later?
On the presentation side, Metaphor is not the most graphically intense game, but it's got that signature Atlus style to it, both in its visuals and UI. I have to say, the focus on UI in their games is really smart. With how much time you spend looking at it in a turn-based game, it's good to have those elements really pop. That being said, like I mentioned before, the UI can be a bit much. Everything is just so big. The menus and combat UI, it's all very stylized, but I'm missing the word. I'm trying to figure out the word that is supposed to be here. On the visuals side, though, the game has a unique style that, while anime, is also enough to make the game easily distinguishable from the crowd. I have to say that Atlus is knocking it out of the park on these fronts. One thing I do find a little bit weird is more on the animation side, which is that some of the characters kind of unhinge their jaw when they talk. It's not a big deal or anything, it's just something I noticed a bit. Speaking of talking, the main character actually says the dialogue choices you pick for him. As I've been saying, this is what I wanted. Even if you're going to have a protagonist that is essentially supposed to be a slate for us to experience the world by, it'd be nice if they spoke, because you have a voice actor there, they can say the lines. And speaking of voice work, the English VO has been phenomenal as always so far.
And in the name of my people, I will strike you down where you stand!
I have very few negatives to say about this game's visual presentation, just the UI is kind of busy. There's the word I was looking for. Yeah, it's busy. But generally, it's still great looking. While I've heard about issues about the port itself, I've yet to really experience any of those issues on my end. That said, Atlus, what happened to the graphics options? Am I crazy, or is this the same situation as P3R, where customization of graphics is incredibly limited? I searched, but I didn't see any way to turn off or turn down certain things. It just feels weird not to have those options available. And it's not the end of the world, but it would certainly help the game be more bearable to play on lower-end devices, or just in general.
Oh, pipe down and eat, boy.
This meaty demo really only made me more curious as to what Metaphor has to offer. I'm very invested in seeing where this story goes, and hoping the gameplay and characters develop interestingly. I have some concerns for the game itself, but the demo has alleviated most of my potential negative feelings. So here's to hoping that Metaphor Refantazio is a great game. And if you have any thoughts about the demo or the game itself, leave it in the comments down below. As always, you can leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more things Atlus and anime RPG related. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.